So I think that we will go ahead and get started. We have an hour to spend together, and thank you all for joining us. So this is a session that is focusing on the role and experiences of multi-actor approach in agro-ecological transitions within the UNISECO project. As I wrote in the chat, what we have is some presentations to kind of share our perspective on this, and then we will open it up to, hopefully we will have some good time for question-answer discussion. And as I say, if we stay a relatively small number of people, we can actually fit 20 people on our screen. So we could look to maybe bring some of those of you who would like to be on the screen with us and actually have the opportunity to speak rather than just type into the box. We could have a little bit of just debate and discussion about the role of multi-actor approach. But for now, we will first move to get a little bit of sense of who is here. So here's a little interaction. If you could go to the right-hand side of your screen, and next to the chat button is a polls button. So if you click on that, there should be some response options there. So we're just interested to know who is here. So tell us about yourself. If you could just answer this question to the best of your ability. Select which actor in this list represents you. Is that everybody who would like to contribute? Of course, I can't see anybody who's raising their hand saying no or yes. Excellent. So I don't know if you can see the results of the poll on your screen underneath the poll. So what I can tell you is that we have 8 of us are researchers, scientists, or students. We have 1 NGO civic organization present with us, 1 policymaker, EU official, and that is our group of people who've responded. So largely researchers, but I'm glad we have a variety of other folks who are here. So the aim of this session is to present the role of multi-actor platforms in the UNISECO project. We'd like to touch on the principles for the operation of these multi-actor platforms, share the experience of applying the multi-actor platform at one of the research, the case study level, and then also pull out some of the key messages that are emerging from the evaluation feedback that we have been collecting over the course of using the multi-actor platform process. Let's see, I have just invited Alexander. Maybe I didn't mean to do that right now, Alexander. We will have you. We'll have you join the table, round table after the presentations. I got carried away. I was ready for conversation. So over the course of the talk, so we generated some possible questions that we might explore. So I pose these for you to consider as you're listening to our experience. So you might consider, how is a multi-actor platform a relevant tool to help understand the issues of agroecology? Is a multi-actor platform a means of producing new knowledge, and in what way? What place is given to knowledge and know-how of local actors in debates in terms of thinking about multi-actor platforms? What types of relationships between actors and researchers do multi-actor platforms allow? And if we have people who have taken part in multi-actor platforms, what experience or reflections do you have from your involvement in a multi-actor approach for agroecology? So these are just some things that we might consider as you hear us give our own reflections. So the first portion of the talk is just touching on some of the principles and operation of the multi-actor platform within UNISECO. And you've met, many of you have already met me, Kate, Irvin. So I was involved in the transdisciplinary multi-actor platform approach, the development of this, which we used as part of the UNISECO. So this approach was used to co-construct practice-validated strategies and incentives for promoting agroecological approaches. The aims of this approach were to produce structured, co-constructed strategies and policy instruments for delivering those public goods through economically viable agroecological farming systems. And some of the impacts that we aimed for were instrumental, so through influencing the development of policy, practice, or services. They were also focusing on trying to increase capacity, leading to operational changes in farming practices. And we also were wanting to either help develop new networks or strengthen existing networks. I think I've just talked about this. Let me go to this next one. So these were designed to be cross boundaries of disciplines, expertise, and roles, both within the academic and non-academic organizations. So we were interested in drawing across multiple different disciplines, expertise, roles. They form an integrative transdisciplinary framework. So if any of you are familiar with the Truss, Truss, and Fry model, we were interested in working in this upper right-hand quadrant, so transdisciplinary and integrative. And they were designed to strengthen the capacity of project partners and actors to assess the sustainability of agroecological farming systems. This was all about co-construction by actors, multiple different actors. So we had farmers involved. We were interested in their knowledge, for example, of equipment and land, bringing researchers, bringing agricultural advisors, bringing policy team members, bringing people from the value chain. So bringing different actors around the table to co-construct and also to facilitate knowledge exchange. So thinking about that in the field, thinking about that through peer-to-peer learning, and also the promotion of best practice in research and business. In thinking about putting together the multi-actor platform, one of the critical questions is, who do you bring to the table and how do you facilitate good interaction? So here we developed some criteria for selecting individuals to inviting them to be part of our multi-actor platform. So clearly and these are on the left-hand side of the screen. So there's thinking about their level of interest, their availability, the relevance of their work to agroecology, etc., their willingness and availability. We were also interested in getting a mixture of gender, geography, and age range in addition to some of the other criteria. We also thought a lot about how do we operate these things? What are the principles that are important to bringing different actors together and trying to move towards co-construction? So these are the principles on the right-hand side of the slide. So thinking about the principles of respect, sharing, listening, attention, teamwork, and ethics, such as research ethics. We were wanting to build on existing relationships. This morning we heard about the importance of trust. So within an existing relationship, there may be established trust. And then we were also interested in developing new relationships and developing new levels of trust. Experience showed us that certainly a good composition and good operation of the platforms created an atmosphere for constructive working. We had multi-actor platforms at multi-levels. So we had a European Union level, and this particular multi-actor platform focused on the relevance of approaches that we were using in UNISECO and the findings to EU and international policy and practice. At the local level, these were at our case study levels, so they were focused on the national or regional local policy and practice within the particular context, the biophysical, the political, and social context for that case study. We were also interested in cross-level, so we wanted to bring the EU level and those case study levels together, and we created what we called a stakeholder reference group, which drew upon both levels to facilitate cross-pollination, integration, and co-construction across levels. The roles of the actors within the multi-actor platform were many. Sometimes they came as bringing a particular kind of knowledge. Sometimes they came because they were a beneficiary of knowledge. And certainly the same actor might play multiple roles, both within the multi-actor platform, but also, of course, outside of that in their non-multi-actor platform role. They also had different relationships. So clearly there were power relationships. This is another thing that one needs to think about when bringing different actors together. So they might differ, both being within their involvement of a multi-actor platform versus outside of that. So we tried to, through our facilitating processes and activities, to create a kind of equal power relationships within the map. Of course, that might differ out with the map. One of the core functions of the multi-actor platforms for this project was really helping to co-develop a rich understanding of the farming systems. So bringing that local understanding of farming systems, of the possibility for transitions in the diverse case studies that were situated across the UNISECO project. This is just an example of one of the ways that we worked with the multi-actor platform. In this example, this is we brought actors together to help us understand and kind of co-understand the networks of flows of information and knowledge and products within a particular case study, which could then go on to inform thinking about what are potential interventions or strategies to facilitate transition in that particular case study. Experience showed from these activities is there was a recognition of the benefits of joint working, and also a kind of added value was the strengthening of the networks between the actors. Many mentioned that they had not had an opportunity to work with some of the people who had that were around the table. So what are some of the lessons learned that we would take forward? So an adherence to the principles and best practice in research ethics certainly contributes to creating outputs and impacts sought. Taking time to identify suitable actors, not only taking the time, but the recognition that it does take time. Similarly, taking time and the recognition that it takes time to recruit actors. It's important that there are no surprises for the actors and there's no surprises for the projects. So being clear about what is involved in being part of a multi-actor platform is part of that recruitment process. It was also important to have a shared understanding of rules of engagement. So at the beginning of each of our activities and work with the multi-actor platform, we would kind of generate that shared understanding of what is the process, what are those operational principles for our working together. The other thing is the co-development of both what is a multi-actor platform for UNISECO and how do we implement that contributed to developing long-term relations and networks. And the operation of these platforms, it does seem, we think, increased a kind of shared capabilities amongst the members in policy, practice, and science who took part in the MultiActor platforms. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my colleague Emmanuel, who will touch on the use of the MultiActor platform in one of the case study settings. So Emmanuel, over to you, and I will turn my screen off, but let me know when you want to have me change the slide.
Okay, thanks, Kat.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emmanuel Guizepelli. I'm a researcher at Israel Lyon, and I was involved from the beginning in the UNISECO project, from the adaptation of SES framework to our problematic to the multi-actor platform. And I will present you how the crossing of scientific and stakeholder approaches brings some new way of thinking and doing research for agro-ecological transition. So next slide, Kate. Thank you. I don't know why I don't see very well my slides. Just a reminder, because Gerald told you about this aspect this morning, but I will present how a socio-ecological system have been used in UNISECO as means of discussing agro-ecological issues in local stakeholder group. Can you show the previous slide? Excuse me. Thank you, Kate. So the aim is to understand how an action situation around a given sustainability issue is influenced by the interaction of its different components. And this approach has been formalized SES framework in a SES framework in the form of a global system organized in subsystems, like, as you can see here: resource system, resource unit, governance system, etc. And all these subsystems are themselves subdivided in numerous variables or even sub-variables that won't be detailed here because it's not very interesting at this point. We have adapted. It's important to have in mind that we have adapted this framework to answer the question of how agroecological orientation are implemented or not in a given system, and why. Next slide, please. Okay. Gerald showed you this schema this morning. I just wanted to remind that we question the subsystem, in particular the focal action situation at the center, in the sense of understanding what's happening in terms of agroecology issue, both in terms of practices. How these practices have concrete impact on resource management, but also how these practices are linked to system of governance and product processing. The question of all the subsystem of socio-ecological frameworks around the central question. Next slide, please. So the SES allowed a multifactorial assessment for sustainability assessment, and it allowed the assessment of the drivers and the barriers to the implementation of agroecological practices, even if the variables can be investigated with quantitative element. The interest of SES framework is to be able to make a qualitative assessment of this interaction between the levels, and therefore to the point of which it was important to have a discussion with the stakeholders. particularly on, I haven't finished, Kate. Can you, yes, okay. So it allowed particularly an aspect important, a lot of studies about agroecological transition concerns most of the time what is going on at farm level, and we used socio-ecological system to have a vision of what is happening off farm, because we have the analysis of SES revealed that many of the barriers to the implementation of these agroecological practices were partly linked to the problem of governance between, for instance, a public authority and the representative of the sector, of the value chain, or can also be linked with the very condition of operation of the agricultural sectors. For instance, just an example. In vineyards, with protected designation of origin, PDO, the use of new disease-resistant hybrid grapes varieties is prohibited because there are a lot of reasons, but the first of them is, for instance, quality of product, taste, typicity, etc. And secondly, for reason of stabilizing yields. So it's important to have in consideration the other aspects that are around the farm level. Next slide, please, Kate. I see it now. It seems that just a point. It seems that the slides don't appear at the same time that you try to show them, Kate.
I think that's true, Emmanuel. There's a little bit of a delay.
Yes. So sorry for my apologies for this disconvenience.
That's okay. It's not your fault.
So, what the use of socio-ecological system framework, how was it used in local multi-actor platform? First point, SES framework was used in structuring aspects of engagement with the multi-actor platforms. And secondly, the approach enabled a step-by-step discussion of the drivers of agroecological farming system and barriers to its uptake. Secondly, it allowed to organize a collection of the in-depth knowledge of specific dynamics in the socio-ecological system at a local, in a local context. And it structures the development of vision of transition toward agroecology at farming level and food system level. And this is very, very important. So he helped to create between the researcher and actors and stakeholders a common understanding what's happening at the farming system and what are the link to do between farming farm level, local level, food system level. And it creates for us, for all the UNISECO teams, a common approach of this transition, and within and between the case studies. It was interesting at the two levels, at the level of the UNISECO teams and at the level of the local stakeholder and map. Next slide, please. Okay. So what is the contribution of agroecological system? What is the contribution of multi-actor platform? Socio-ecological system allowed an expert knowledge. It gave the possibility to have a complete set of variables to see, to assess what are the drivers and the barriers to agroecological transition at different levels. But socio-ecological system cannot see what are their relative importance. And only MultiActor Platform can give this importance of the level, of the different level. What can we do at different level? MultiActor, the contribution here is very, very important. That's the reason why it's impossible to avoid to have a MultiActor platform in such a diagnosis. Knowledge from communities of place and of interest are very crucial in the assessment of feasibility, the concrete feasibility of proposed practice by the SES. It helped to the prioritization, of issues and action by differentiating what is relevant to do at different scale, at different level. And it allowed to initiate social dynamics around this question. So the cross of SES framework and MultiActor platform can to help an implementation of agroecological practices by identifying what are the relevant practices and their level of action, and to have reflection about new market and the launch of experiments, particularly with research. And this is the most important, according to us, contribution to in crossing these two approaches. The next slide, please, Kate. Thanks. It appears slowly. So we have a creation of vision of action plan based on a holistic and interdisciplinary analysis of drivers, barriers, and have a certain idea of what can be the sustainability of a food system and agroecological practices in a given socio-ecological system. Point one, it allowed discussion of technical practices and identifying a broad range of key factors important to the dynamics. A key factor that cannot be given that only by a scientific approach, even with a socio-ecological system, because local stakeholders make links that an external analyze don't do spontaneously. So it can design and it's allow a design and implementation for a future of agroecological farming system and practice as identified by stakeholders. And it's important because we had this morning the trust, the question of the trust. Well, that have been written in the chat box. And this is very important. What farmers say and do when they talk about agroecological practices is very, very important, because it is linked at the same time with their practices, concrete practices, and their wishes. And this is so the map is therefore an indispensable complement to the SES framework in order not only to establish a state of play, but also to produce a concrete diagnosis with identified development issues well-ranked priorities according to their order of importance, urgency, and feasibility. So crossing SES and MultiActor Platform enables a coherence and a reflection of the concrete modalities of action on how to make the different levels work together. And also show the implementation of agro-ecological practices must be carried out at several levels at the same time, and their efficiency depends to a large extent on this articulation. Thanks for your attention.
Emmanuel, thank you very much. And Alexandra, I have your slides up. And
Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome. Hopefully there will not be too much of a delay, but it is the joys of working online. So.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Hello, I am Alexandra Zbrignietopoulou from the Agricultural University of Athens. And the last part of the presentation focuses on the evaluation process developed in the UNISECO, and particularly on the ex-post evaluation of multi-actor engagement. Next slide, please. The main objectives of the multi-actor engagement at the level of the case studies was to interpret societal expectations using a participatory process with stakeholders and end users, to engage end users in the process of sustainability assessment, to empower them and make them familiar with the use of sustainability assessment tools. Next slide, please. We designed an ongoing evaluation aiming to assess the performance of the multi-actor platforms in promoting co-learning and capacity building of key actors, focusing on the moments of engagement, the moment interacted with MAP members through the various participatory events. And based on the feedback received, we tried to adjust and improve our approach. Next slide, please. On top of that, at the final stages of the project, the evaluation process was complemented with an ex-post evaluation exercise, aiming to determine the effect of participatory project activities on the capacities and networks of participants. At the case study level, project partners distributed questionnaires or conducted personal structured interviews with their local MAP members who were continuously involved in the project, aiming to assess to what extent there are changes as a result of their involvement. Next slide, please. So far, we have received feedback from 82 members of multi-actor platforms in 12 partner countries. And it seems that we have a good balance between female and male respondents. Next slide, please. And this table summarizes the allocation of respondents by categories of key actors in each case study. The majority of respondents are scientists and advisors, representatives of authorities and administration, farmers, and NGOs. Next slide, please. The questionnaire comprised 8 questions. 4 of them were closed-ended questions related to the dissemination and discussions about UNISECO, the use of material, the respondents' participations in other activities and groups, encouraging also respondents to add comments and further information against each question. Next slide, please. Based on the ex-post evaluation feedback, the majority of respondents have discussed the UNISECO project activities and outcomes with their colleagues, other experts, and their families. Half of the respondents have used the resources provided to them in order to communicate and inform others about issues related to their professional activity. Some examples here are the use of deliverables, the story maps, and the social network analysis tools. More than 3/4 of respondents have participated at least in another meeting, activity, or campaign for sustainable agriculture. And here have some events organized by the European Commission, the AKIS, the Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation Systems, the Agro-Ecology Forum. And the last bullet is that around 1 in 4 respondents have become members at least of one new group, network, partnership on agroecological farming practices. Examples are the working group for the CAP strategic planning and the result-based payments network. Next slide, please. There were also 4 Likert scale questions asking to what extent actors expanded their networks, learned something new. They will use this new knowledge information and whether an attitude change has occurred. Next slide, please. Findings revealed that more than half of respondents have established communication links with persons for sharing information and experience on agroecology. Most respondents feel that they have learned something new about agroecological issues, and some examples here are the importance of analyzing the roles and influence of the various actors, or the factors that encourage and inhibit farmers from adopting agroecological practices. Around 2/3 will use this information and knowledge acquired in their professional activities, for instance, to develop a territorial economic plan or in other ongoing projects. And 4 in 5 respondents were already involved in sustainable agriculture and had a positive attitude towards agroecological farming practices. And next slide, please. So here are some lessons learned from applying our ex-post evaluation exercise. Engagement may create opportunities for network building and interactions or information exchange with actors at the local level. But also there were cases where actors felt that a UNISECO project didn't generate practical solutions to local problems, or they were only involved in the provision of information. Thus, considerable efforts are needed to create viable and consistent content with actors' needs and interests. And this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Kate.
And I think that I will stop sharing the screen at this point. So in this particular format in this online system, so we're in what's called a session rather than plenary. So we can actually have, more than a few people on the screen. So if there are, we can certainly pick up comments, questions that are in the chat box to we can answer and address these. Or if there is someone in the room with us who has a kind of comment or observation that they would like to verbalize by voice rather than writing in the chat box, there should be a button, a green button that says let me in or activate my video voice, and we could bring you to the screen with us. Emmanuel, there is one comment here about the kind of connection linkage between the SES and the MAP approach. So I don't know whether you want to engage in this question here.
From which?
This is from, so if you look in the chat, it's from Yona.
I don't see this.
Ah.
I can read it if we'd like.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Daniel.
It seems that a kind of multi-actor approach is inherent in the successful functioning of SES, at least following the principles of governing of the commons. Other than acquisition and co-creation of knowledge and imagining possible futures, it is difficult for the researcher to understand which new elements are brought by the MAP approach. You may have explained this and they might have missed it, but can you please clarify which new elements are being brought by the MAP approach other than acquisition and co-creation of knowledge?
I meant that SES framework can help to identify a set of barriers and drivers to agro-ecological practices, but the way then they can be triggered can only be assessed within the multi-actor platform, because particularly at local scale, local level, because local stakeholders know their territory, knows how they work, and they can assess what are the main for their own experience, what are the main difficulties they meet to implementation of practice. And for instance, it's not possible at the day, at the present time, to have hybrids. I gave this example because hybrids are not identified in the specification charge of the product. So they cannot produce wine with hybrid resistant varieties grape. And there were a lot of reflection on how to integrate hybrids within protected designation origin specification. It's a huge question, for instance, in France. So it allowed to have an idea of the future on how we can diversify the grape varieties in the way of producing wine. I only give a French example, but maybe my colleagues can have some others. Kate and Daniel, have you got any other example? I don't know if I have answered very well to this question.
I think that's probably a good start. We have some other things that are coming up. So Pete, Daniel, do you want to manage the questions? I'll step out.
From Pete Goddard. A question about the project's legacy. can the maps, particularly at local level, be self-sustaining after UNISECO ends, without the need for each external organization or facilitation?
I think
Do you want
that's,
to answer, Kate?
yeah, sure. Pete, I think that's a very good question. And I think to the extent that the involvement in the maps has created some either created or strengthened networks, then I think in that respect, there will be a carrying on. If you want to think about, so one of the ways that we conceptualize these maps was kind of a fluid pool of individuals that might be pulled in at different points during the course of the project, depending upon what might need to be doing at that stage of the project, whether it was focusing on kind of policy mechanisms or farm level. And of course, that was also dependent upon their availability. So if one could imagine that continuing pool of individuals who might step in and step out based on their connections with one another, then that is a way that it could carry forward. But without the central focus of a UNISECO project, I think that's an open question. But I would welcome your thoughts on that, Pete, and certainly anybody else in the room in terms of your own observations of how multi-actor platforms might be able to be carried forward.
Excuse me, Daniel, I cannot help you to read the question in the chat box, because I don't see the question in the chat box.
Okay, I'll read the question again.
Okay.
The question about the project's legacy. Can the maps, particularly at local level, be self-sustaining after UNISECO ends, without the need for external organization or facilitation?
Kate, I've just
Yeah,
answered.
I just answered that one. Emmanuel, if you have, I don't know whether you have the chat.
Yes, I have
open.
the chat.
Okay, but you're not able to see anything. Okay.
Then the next question, Alexander Wessel. You can either write it or you could say it verbally, since you have your camera.
I try to apply really the multi-actor approach, where we see each other and exchange directly and not just sending mails.
Wonderful.
or chat messages, because I'm also still old-fashioned and not always using this. And well, so my question was, well, in having all these platforms in different countries, what was the major outcome you saw for knowledge sharing or knowledge creation? So knowledge creation coming from the farmers and sharing then with other farmers, or sharing between farmers, or exchange between farmers and researchers. So what is your feeling? What were the major or the most important outcomes related to this?
There were, for my part, there were new, both Alexander. There were new creation of new knowledge between farmers that could I speak only for French part. I don't know what it is for the other countries, but for French part, the local map and the multi-actor platform at regional level has allowed to a comparison between the practices under different climate, what works, what doesn't work, in which condition it works or not. It's a building knowledge that is going on, and that has beginning and is going on, and it's very, very important, this aspect, because in reality there is no stabilized knowledge on agro-ecological practices, and farmers learn step by step by exchanging their experiments and practices. This is a very, very important aspect, because they didn't know what they knew. Okay, And this is very important because they have a consciousness of what they knew or not. Very important. And there is no technical advice for this. Not yet. No organized technical advice. It's always punctual, yes. It's always, it's always by opportunity and not organized in a concrete and systemic way. And this is very important, is the first step. I did learn new knowledge from farmers, from wine growers, because I didn't know how each grape, this grape variety react to a pesticide, and this one how it react. There are a very thin vision of a knowledge of what the different grape varieties, what are their characteristics, ecological characteristics. And even for us, it was important to know this, because when we have solution with agro-ecological practices, with green manure, for instance, for fertilizer, it works very well in Beaujolais. It doesn't work very well in Ardèche because of the climate and the soil. So there is no unique solution. There is no only one solution. There must be a set of solutions that has to be still discovered and created in these exchanges.
Was it similar in other countries also?
Alexandra, I wonder if you could say something, whether you have any reflection on the Greek case study or insight from the kind of comments that have been coming in through the evaluation on this particular question.
Mm-hmm. I will refer first for the Greek multi-actor platforms. There was exchange between information and knowledge between different types of actors. In our meetings, we had interacted with farmers, with representatives from the processing industries, and there were local policy officers and of course advisors, and who were and consultants. And there were many cases where all these people didn't come together and discuss. So it was a very interesting exchange of information between them.
Sounds wonderful. There's a comment in the chat. Pete thinks that Emmanuel's reply to Alexander also shows the value of continuing the map and showing the value of farmers and other actors, of course, learning from others. MAP has provided the opportunity for this and is worth continuing if possible, although this may be beyond the project scope. Do we have any other questions? If not, I can give one final question because it looks like we only have a few minutes. This is taken from some of our food for thought questions. What experiences or reflections do you have from involvement in a multi-actor approach for agroecology?
So this question might be actually to our individuals sitting around the table with us, maybe not necessarily us. So if there's anybody
I can respond because I'm involved also in another multi-actor approach project, and it's you have to leave your comfort zone because many of the researchers are not typically carrying out workshops and being with them. And so you have to leave and being in an undefined environment sometimes in these workshops and seeing how farmers react and how the exchange goes on. So that's one important thing I learned, especially. Don't be afraid, but you cannot manage completely how things will go on, but take as much as possible also for you. And as Emmanuel said, learning also from the others. Well, I learned a lot also from farmers in having this more, well, what we called multi-actor workshops, but you called it multi-actor platform. So.
I am typing a message to Pete Goddard and David King, who I know happen to be sitting around the table with us and were involved in the MultiActor platform for UNISECO. So I don't know if you have any reflections on kind of your own involvement. There may be other people sitting around the table who have had who've had experience that you'd like to share as we bring this to a close. Pete Goddard is saying he learned a lot.
Ilona very much agrees. Wonders if the MAP members are learning as much as us researchers.
I would reflect on the UK experience. I think your question is a very interesting one, Alexander, in terms of where is the exchange, where is the learning, what are those points of integration? Is it just for the researchers or is it for the other actors around the table? Certainly for the actors in the UK, many of them knew one another, but there were also some new connections made. And I think some kind of, or they had peripherally known one another. And this project brought an opportunity for them to come together. And it seemed as though there was a great deal of kind of bridge building, knowledge development, co-learning, sharing going on between actors, not just researchers. I can speak for myself. I learned a ton. So I think the researchers have a fantastic opportunity to be moving, as you say, outside of their comfort zone and expanding a richer and deeper knowledge of an area that they have a certain level of expertise, and then they get it expanded. So I think it, at least in the UK, I think it looked as though it was not just the researchers who were learning, but there was a deep learning going on between the other actors as well. I think maybe we bring this to a close, unless there's some other things hanging out there in the chat box.
For us, I've also brought entirely new people into the group, with usual suspects hovering around the agriculture policy making table, other than the usual suspects. And another comment, I think this reflects other aspects of farming in the widest sense. Good to enable dialogue between enthusiasts. Some are more difficult to reach.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would like to thank everybody for coming to this session.
Thank you.
Delightful conversation. Appreciate your input, thoughts, and hopefully there's if you have other thoughts throughout the day, we do have one of the I don't know what they're called in the gallery. One of the booths is about the multi-actor platform approach, and you could certainly leave messages there and we can carry on the conversation.